The 1904 St. Louis Olympic Marathon, the most insane race in Olympic history. August 30th, 1904, St. Louis. The starting gunfires for the Olympic Marathon, and what follows defies belief. Runners drinking rat poison as energy drinks, dodging wild dogs, and collapsing from heat stroke on dusty roads. One man hitchhikes 11 miles, another nearly dies from eating rotten apples, and the eventual winner is carried across the finish line by his trainers. Welcome to the 1904 St. Louis Olympic Marathon, the most chaotic, dangerous, and absurdly entertaining race in Olympic history, where finishing alive was more impressive than finishing first. Chapter 1. A Recipe for Disaster. The 1904 Summer Olympics were already a disaster waiting to happen. St. Louis had stolen the games from Chicago through political maneuvering, then stretched the competition across 5 months to coincide with the World's Fair. Most European athletes couldn't afford the long journey to America, leaving a field dominated by American club runners and a handful of international oddities. The marathon course was a nightmare. 2485 miles of dusty roads, 7 hills, and only one water station at the 12-mile mark. Dr. James Sullivan, the race director, deliberately designed this deprivation as an experiment. He wanted to test the effects of purposeful dehydration on human performance, essentially using Olympic athletes as lab rats. The temperature on race day hit 90 degrees with crushing humidity. Arthur Corey, a Boston runner, wrote in his diary, "The roads were thick with dust kicked up by automobiles and horses. We could barely breathe, let alone run. I knew men would die on this course." 32 runners lined up at 3 p.m. on August 30th, the hottest part of the day naturally. Among them were seasoned American marathoners, 2 South African Tswana tribesmen running in their first Olympic Games, and a Cuban mailman who had raised money for his trip by demonstrating his running skills around Havana. Chapter 2. The Cuban Mailman and the Apple Catastrophe. Felix Carvajal was the marathon's most colorful character. This Cuban postman had raised funds for his Olympic journey by running exhibition races in Havana's Central Square. He arrived at the starting line wearing street clothes, dress shoes, and a beret. Fellow runner Martin Sheridan took pity on him, cutting off his pants at the knees with a pair of scissors to create makeshift running shorts. Carvajal started strong, chatting with spectators in broken English and even stopping to practice his pronunciation with farmers along the route. His downfall came at mile 15, when he spotted an apple orchard. Parched from the heat and lack of water, Carvajal devoured green apples straight from the trees. Dr. Charles Lucas, following the race in an automobile, recorded, "The Cuban doubled over in agony around mile 16. He had severe stomach cramps from eating unripe apples. For nearly an hour, he lay in the shade, vomiting and cramping. We thought he might die. Then incredibly, he got up and continued running." Despite his apple-induced food poisoning, Carvajal finished 4th. His time was respectable, and he spent the final miles joking with spectators and demonstrating his speed by running backwards for short stretches. He remains the only Olympic marathoner to stop for a snack mid-race and still place in the top 5. Chapter 3. The Great Hitchhiking Scandal. Fred Lors of New York started fast but hit the wall around mile 9 due to the crushing heat and dust. Suffering from severe cramps, he flagged down a passing automobile and rode comfortably for 11 miles, while his fellow competitors suffered on the dusty roads. The car broke down near mile 20, and Lors, now refreshed, got out and jogged the final 5 miles to the stadium. He entered the Olympic Stadium to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd like a conquering hero. Officials began preparing for the medal ceremony when someone pointed out that Lors looked suspiciously fresh for someone who had just run 26 miles in 90-degree heat. When confronted, Lors initially claimed he had run the entire distance. Only after intense questioning did he admit to his automotive assistance. His excuse was that he thought it was a good joke and never intended to accept the medal. The Amateur Athletic Union banned him for life, a punishment later reduced to 1 year when officials realized the whole 1904 marathon was such a farce that singling out Lors seemed unfair. Chapter 4. The Rat Poison Energy Drink. Meanwhile, the actual winner, Thomas Hicks, was dying by degrees in the most scientifically irresponsible way possible. Hicks, a British-born brass worker from Cambridge, Massachusetts, was accompanied by his trainers, Charles Lucas and Arthur Corey, who had turned him into a human experiment. Starting at mile 10, they began administering their secret weapon, strychnine sulfate mixed with brandy. Strychnine, commonly used as rat poison, was thought to be a stimulant in small doses, though the line between stimulating and lethal was dangerously thin. Dr. Lucas documented the experiment with scientific detachment. At mile 14, we gave Hicks 1/60th grain of strychnine in brandy. At mile 19, another dose with egg whites. His skin turned ashen gray, and his eyes became bloodshot. He begged us to let him lie down, but we forced him to continue. The strychnine was slowly poisoning Hicks, but it also acted as a stimulant, keeping him moving when his body wanted to collapse. For the final 7 miles, his trainers essentially carried him, supporting his weight while his legs moved in a shuffling approximation of running. Chapter 5. Wild Dogs and Heat Stroke Casualties. While Hicks was being chemically tortured toward victory, other runners faced their own battles with the brutal course. William Garcia, a California runner, collapsed from heat stroke at mile 20, his body temperature reaching dangerous levels. He was rushed to a hospital where doctors fought to save his life. He survived but never fully recovered. John Masciani and Len Tao, the two Tswana runners from South Africa, were the only black athletes in the race. They had been brought to St. Louis as part of the World's Fair's anthropology exhibit, a shameful display meant to showcase primitive peoples to white American audiences. Despite this degrading treatment, both men were accomplished runners. Their race took a surreal turn around mile 18 when they were chased nearly a mile off course by wild dogs. These weren't ordinary strays. They were aggressive farm dogs that saw the runners as intruders. Masciani later said through a translator, "We ran from those dogs faster than we ran the marathon. They had big teeth and bad intentions." Despite the dog chase, Masciani finished 9th and Tao came in 12th. Remarkable performances given the conditions and their complete lack of familiarity with marathon racing. Tao might have placed even higher, but he lost valuable time when he stopped to examine an interesting rock formation, apparently more fascinated by American geology than Olympic glory. Chapter 6. The Poison Victory. Thomas Hicks entered the Olympic Stadium after 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 53 seconds of the most chemically enhanced suffering in sports history. He was barely conscious, supported by his trainers, his body ravaged by heat and strychnine poisoning. Contemporary accounts describe a horrifying scene. Hicks's skin was gray-green, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he was hallucinating. Dr. Lucas wrote, "Hicks could not walk unassisted. His temperature was dangerously high, pulse erratic. We had to carry him across the finish line while moving his legs to simulate running." The crowd cheered wildly, unaware they were witnessing a man in the final stages of poisoning. Hicks was immediately rushed to a hospital where doctors worked to flush the strychnine from his system. He lost 8 pounds during the race, an extreme level of dehydration that would have killed most people. James Sullivan awarded Hicks the gold medal while he lay in a hospital bed, barely conscious. The medal ceremony was postponed for 3 days until Hicks could stand upright. When reporters asked about his victory, Hicks said he couldn't remember anything after mile 15. The strychnine had erased his memory of winning Olympic gold. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Olympic Shame. The 1904 St. Louis Marathon became an immediate scandal. European newspapers called it a disgrace to the Olympic movement and American barbarism masquerading as sport. The London Times wrote, "What occurred in St. Louis was not athletics, but a gladiatorial spectacle where men were tortured for entertainment." Of the 32 starters, only 14 finished the race. 2 were hospitalized with life-threatening conditions. Several others required medical attention for heat exhaustion, dehydration, and various injuries. The Tswana runners, despite their dog encounter, were among the healthiest finishers. Their experience running in African heat served them well. The race prompted immediate reforms in Olympic athletics. Future marathons would have multiple water stations, medical personnel stationed throughout the course, and strict regulations about performance-enhancing substances. The concept of scientific training through deliberate deprivation was abandoned as dangerously misguided. Thomas Hicks never raced competitively again. The strychnine poisoning caused permanent health problems, and he died in 1963, convinced that his Olympic victory had shortened his life. Fred Lors, the hitchhiker, was reinstated after his one-year ban and won the Boston Marathon in 1905, legitimately this time. Dr. James Sullivan, the race director, defended the event for years, claiming it provided valuable scientific data about human endurance limits. Modern sports scientists view his experiment as a cautionary tale about putting scientific curiosity above athlete safety. The 1904 St. Louis Olympic Marathon stands as a monument to human folly and endurance in equal measure. It was athletics as horror show, competition as torture, and victory as survival. The race revealed both the worst impulses of early 20th century sports science and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. What makes this marathon truly extraordinary isn't just its chaos, but how it changed Olympic athletics forever. The suffering in St. Louis led directly to modern safety protocols, proper hydration stations, and strict drug testing. Today's marathoners owe their safety to the men who nearly died on those dusty Missouri roads. The 1904 race also reveals something profound about competition itself. When pushed to extremes, sport becomes something more primal, a test of pure survival instinct. Hicks won gold, but Carvajal's apple-eating adventure, the Tswana runner's dog chase, and even Lors's hitchhiking joke became more memorable than any official time or medal. Perhaps that's the real lesson of the St. Louis Marathon. The human stories matter more than the official results. In our modern age of perfectly regulated, scientifically optimized athletics, there's something almost charming about a race where a Cuban mailman could stop for snacks, wild dogs could alter the course, and the winner could be carried across the finish line by his coaches while hallucinating from rat poison. Next episode, The Bone Wars of the Wild West, when two paleontologists turned dinosaur hunting into a decades-long feud of espionage, sabotage, and scientific rivalry that nearly destroyed American paleontology.